Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. We have a relatively small crowd here in Macon, but we are recording this. So hopefully it can be useful to folks over the course of the year. This week marks International Ethics Awareness Week. And as a USG institution, we like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about ethical behavior and what that looks like. And just because I'm sort of a word nerd, I actually looked up the definition of ethics this morning, and it is defined as moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. But in the case of a university, I think when we talk about ethics, it doesn't only govern us as individuals, but it governs who we are as an organization, as an institution, and how we behave with one another. And so I'm very grateful this morning that we have a number of our faculty and staff experts on hand to talk about what ethics looks like in various fields. And to moderate this panel, we have our internal auditor, Rose Patty, who is part of the team in the Office of the President, but also reports up to the university system, is the person that's tasked with a number of things, one of which is manning our ethics hotline. So if someone sees something on campus that they think is unethical, they can report it anonymously, and Rose heads up the looking into that and figuring out what's actually going on and taking appropriate action. So with that, I will hand it over to Rose, who will, oh, sorry, that was a little bit hard, but I'll hand the microphone over to Rose, who will take the time to speak with our experts. And I failed to introduce myself. I'm Frances Davis. I serve as counsel here at Middle Georgia State. And ethics is incredibly important to me, not only because it's something that is part and parcel of who we are, but also because if we behave ethically, the chances that we will get in legal trouble are very, very small. So I will now hand it over to Rose and look forward to hearing from all of our faculty and staff.
Thank you, Frances. And we'll get started with the first question. If you would just introduce yourself and what your area of expertise is. And our first question is, what are the most common ethical issues that you confront in your field of expertise?
Good deal. Well, good morning. My name is Jeff Tarver, and I'm assistant professor of criminal justice here at Middle Georgia State University. Criminal justice is a relatively broad field, to say the least, but for the sake of time, I'll just break it down to the three main components of the criminal justice system, which are law enforcement, of course, and corrections. For law enforcement, of course, we know, if you watch the news, is up under heavy scrutiny right now as it relates to police brutality and things of that nature. Of course, law enforcement officers basically live in a fishbowl, so anything that they do wrong is going to be magnified to the highest degree. So I would probably say police brutality right now with law enforcement. But also, you just saw something recently come out in Los Angeles with an officer planting evidence on the suspect. And something that's prevalent right now with law enforcement as well is social media. You have a lot of law enforcement officers that are voicing unethical opinions about minorities and things of that nature on social media, and it's getting them in some hot water right now. As it relates to the court system, of course, you have prosecutors, defense attorneys, and also judges. As it relates to prosecutors, you have prosecutors that are, I guess, engaging in prosecutorial misconduct, unethical uses of plea bargaining, kind of trying to strong arm defendants in order to take pleas, things of that nature. Defense attorneys encouraging their clients to take pleas instead of actually fighting for their clients, and also judges with being impartial. Sentencing unfairly, disparities in sentencing and things of that nature. And last but not least, the correctional system. You're starting to see a lot of, well, it's nothing new, but with it's starting to come to the forefront of a lot of inmates being abused inside of correctional facilities, not just physically, but also sexually as well. So you're starting to see a lot of contraband being brought in by correctional staff. So most of the contraband that you find, be it that phones, drugs, cigarettes, things of that nature, actually come from staff bringing it in and getting paid by the inmates or the families that are in the community. So those are just some of the ethical issues that we see right now in criminal justice.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Vicki Smith, and I'm from Human Resources here at the university. And as I looked at these questions and was trying to think of examples in response to question number one, really for human resources, I think all of the examples that I boiled down to two main areas. Being consistent with the action of procedures and also being consistent with the treatment of individuals when reaching decisions. And in human resources, as in most of the areas represented here on the stage, there is a tremendous intersection between ethics and the law. And so our employment law guides many of our decisions.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying is, elementary as this sounds, in my background is I'm Mimi Ford. My background is law and accounting. I'm a CPA, and then I also have my JD. My background in accounting is tax, so some of the things that I will talk about will have to do with filing tax returns. But I teach ethics, and one of the things that I try to tell my students is that how you treat people becomes an ethical issue. Businesses have got to be concerned with that now because they're under the microscope. If they do something wrong, even if you're a small business, everybody's going to find out about it on social media. And so whether you're an employer or an employee, when you do not treat your customers right, it's going to become, everybody's going to know about it. It's going to catch on fire. So that's one of the first things that you should be concerned about. But then as you get into other aspects, particularly in accounting, as an employee, it comes down to just cheating. And what I mean by cheating, I mean cheating on time. One of the things when I go to continuing education meetings and I hear about employers talk, the big problem they have is people that have got to use their work time to talk on their cell phone or come into work late. But then it bleeds over into things like cheating on their time sheets. And that ends up cheating both the customer and it can be cheating the employer as well. And so that's one of the really big things in accounting is how you bill clients. And so that's why when I talk about cheating, it can be cheating on the time, but it's strange in that in businesses, it can even be coming down to worries about employees stealing things. And I know that sounds kind of weird to bring up, but when I was working in accounting, there was this person, his nickname was, so that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of person he was to begin with. But after he quit, to age myself, this was one of the big 8 accounting firms. And he quit and started his own practice and had a party at his house. And he's a little drunk. He opens the door and he shows this room that is filled with all supplies that he got, office supplies that he got from Pete Marwick. Needless to say, it did not impress us, but he thought it was. And so we all knew why he was called Weasel at Georgia Tech. But anyway, some of the other things when you are working, at least in tax, when you're preparing that tax return, you can be greatly penalized if you do not make it accurate, as well as if a client comes in, something that is not true. They're telling you that they've got 5 children and they want to take the earned income credit for that, and they've got 2 children that they're claiming 3 dogs as a dependent. You can't sign that tax return if you know that there are things on it that are not true. And that's just something that is really important when you're preparing taxes, as well as confidentiality. And that goes around in business as well. The rules of confidentiality are so important. You can get in trouble if you don't keep the information confidential. And as far as the IRS goes, when you have tax information, you can only use it for tax return. You can't use it for any other purposes. And those are just a few of the things. So, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Melinda Moffitt. I'm Director of Career Services. And in reference to this question, one of the things I've found in my role is that many times individuals will come in and they're looking to either enter the workforce for the first time, or they have been in the workforce and are looking to move up. Situation, sometimes there's a tendency to fudge the truth, meaning to say things that either they feel like it's happened, but not for the time frame that I said it happened. Maybe I was asked about the skills or how long I worked at a certain location. And I was really there 6 months, but I'll just say a year because that sounds better. And in their minds, I believe they don't understand the difference, that the gray area really matters. If an employer finds out that they have lied, typically it's a no-win situation. There's no way to come back from that. And so lying, whether blatantly, what they call a big lie, or that little white lie, as they like to describe when they say nobody would care, it'll be okay. All of it can have consequences. So when we talk about in the area of career services, ethical decisions, typically I see those things on the resume or in an interview setting where they feel like nobody's going to know. I can just say this. It will better my chances to either move up or to jump off my career, and it'll be in my past. One of the things that some of us may remember is that not too long ago, there was a big issue with individuals stating when they didn't. A blatant lie. Easily able to be verified, right? We had people who had been in their career 15, 20 years. And it just so happened that it was starting to be looked into for whatever reason. And it was realized that they never had a degree at all. So they were in a major position, meaning obviously they could do the job, but that lie meant something. That unethical decision made 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it means something and it never goes away. And so, in career services, I tell when they create the resumes, when they're going in for the interview, be truthful, because it may not come back tomorrow. It may not, but it may come back. And that's the gamble that you really don't want to have to take.
Hello, I'm Ben Murphy, Professor of Health Administration. In looking at the primary ethical consideration today in the field of health administration and in society when it deals with healthcare, we're really talking about the allocation of care in a world of finite resources, meaning time and money. On one hand, you want to be a moral enterprise. I don't think anyone goes into healthcare not wanting to do the right thing for people. It takes a lot of work to get into where you're going to be. But on the other hand, there's this thing called economic reality. And deciding who gets what and why creates a lot of issues. On one hand, we want to be a moral enterprise. We want to have equity. We want to have social justice. And we want to do the Kantian ideal, treat other people fairly. But on the other hand, we become utilitarians. We can't help anyone if we close tomorrow because yesterday we gave a lot of care away. We can't help anyone if my staff leaves because we can't pay them. So we do have these resource limitations, and add to that an environment where the quality and the access of equipment and diagnostics and services is astronomical. The type of quality we can provide is really high. Does not keep up with that. You can't increase your billing and your income more than the technology and care needs increase. So the health administrator, as well as everybody else who has to deal with healthcare, has this window they have to bring the business through. On one hand, you have to be legal. We can't forget that. And on the other hand, you have to face economic reality. And it takes a lot of hard work and compassion to guide that business right through that window.
Oh, thank you, panelists. We can stay with you, Bill, for our second question. And that is, what rules or regulations govern ethics in the field? And what are some of the most serious consequences for ethical violations? I know in particular in my field as internal audit, the Institute of Internal Auditors has issued a code of ethics that we must follow in order to stay compliant with our certification. So I'm wondering applies to the different fields we have represented here.
Right. Well, in healthcare, we have a couple of of ethical levels. We have the licensing level of ethics, where the licensing board for nurses, if a nurse does something unethical, will go after them. And they could actually lose their license and practice. Same for doctors, same for respiratory therapists, same for lawyers. We also have a lot of overlap between those ethics and law. So if a nurse does something that's unethical, or if a doctor does something unethical like abandon a patient, or fails to keep confidentiality, as was mentioned, then there are also legal repercussions so that the patient can go after them. And if you do it bad enough, the government can come after you criminally. So there's this level of enforcing what starts out as ethics and becomes law. And you don't want to mess with any of those.
In my field, I don't know of anyone who has gone to jail for blatant mistruth or their resume or even in an interview setting. But what I did think of when I read this question was asking, how would you feel if you knew that the pilot on a plane that you were on dropped out of aviation school? They lied. They didn't actually make it through the program. How would you feel if you knew that the doctor that was treating you never finished medical school? Or the attorney sitting in the courtroom, never finished law school? I mean, these are consequences not only for the person that told the mistruth, but also for society. In career services in my area, I talk to people about being honest for the sake of being ethical and having a clear conscience, but also about what would happen in the future just by not being truthful. When most of us can probably remember doing an application, and at the bottom it will say, I certify that by checking this box, these things are true. And so that's your opportunity to think about what you've placed there and what would be the consequences of not telling the truth. The employer does have a right to be able to say why you fudged the information that you've listed. They don't have to give you that opportunity. So the consequences could be immediate termination, or it could be damaging of your reputation, or maybe both. What we know is that reputation precedes us. And so lying in my area, it just never goes away. You don't get a chance to get over it. Make an unethical decision, to say something that's not true, just to never go away. And so that's kind of what I leave for people to think about.
Well, mine very much mirrors a great deal of what Bill said. With the accounting profession, you have the State Board of Accountancy that is involved. But then you also can be subject to criminal liability for things that you do wrong in the accounting profession that are wrong. And of course, the same would go on with business. If you have done illegal, you can be prosecuted for it. The other thing that I would point out is there's a law, this applies to publicly traded corporations, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and that deals with when you are a CEO and you sign the financial statements. If you sign them and you know that they are untrue, you can face jail time. Under the SOX Act, as it's called, you can have a maximum of 20 years in prison and I think around $5 million. Then you've also had, when you start talking about the filing of tax returns, that the IRS can come after a tax preparer when they breach the duty of filing a return that is accurate, or when they give up that confidential information. So those are some of the things that you have to be concerned about in business. And as Bill talked about, sometimes you can do something that is legal, that's perfectly legal, but that still does not mean that it is ethical. And that's going to come back to bite you when you're unethical when it comes to your company's reputation. And as an employee, when it comes to your own personal reputation. Under these licensings, you can lose your license. It may be that you don't go to prison, career can be shot. And as someone going to work in accounting, the accounting firms are going to do a thorough background check your reputation really starts in school. You're building a resume now, because in the accounting profession, they take being ethical so seriously. The truthfulness, honesty is paramount in that profession, because the public is trusting the CPAs. And I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, I think for human resources, you've heard some of the same things from the other areas in terms of what governs us. First of all, there's overlying federal law. Then underneath of that, there would be state law. And then underneath of that would be an institution's individual handbook, operating procedures. So those are the things that govern human resources. And much like these other areas, the consequence to not acting ethically in any one of those areas has to do with reputation, the firm's reputation, to employ, to recruit, to retain employees. There is always the possibility of a lawsuit, which affects many things, including, of course, the financials of an institution. So the consequences have a far range, from morale issues to the employees, way up to the legal and financial consequences for the institution.
Well, as it relates to criminal justice, of course, in law enforcement, all law enforcement officers are post-certified. So they're certified peace officers that are given powers to arrest and things of that nature. So, of course, these officers take an oath, once it's time for them to actually get into their field. They take an oath saying that they're going to uphold the Constitution, of course, enforce laws. So once you go against that oath, of course, now you put yourself in a position in order to lose that post-certification. Like Dr. Moffitt said, your reputation precedes you. So once you, lose that post and you're trying to get back into, the field of law enforcement, of course, that's going to come up on some type of background check, post-certification, or the Peace Council and post, they keep a record of everything. So, that record is going to follow you wherever you go. As it relates to attorneys, of course, you have the National Bar Association. So anything unethical, that can be investigated, of course, you can be disbarred. For correctional officers, you have the American Correctional Association that has a code of ethics as well. So anything that, that you do that goes against the grain of that, you can be held liable, lose those post-certification, or lose your ability to practice law, be terminated. And unfortunately, in some cases, you can be charged as well. You've seen over the course of the past few years where law enforcement officers, who behave unethically have been charged and have been put in prison themselves. So those are some of the three things that we deal with in criminal justice.
Okay, thank you all.
Mhm.
And now for our third and final question. What advice would you all give to professionals or aspiring professionals in your field that are faced with an ethical decision? How should they evaluate the decision? Where should they seek guidance along those lines?
Well, for criminal justice, I believe Bill said this earlier, is it legal? I think in what policy, as a young professional, once you get into an organization, they always tell you to refer to policy. Policy will save you. So, is it legal? Does it align with policy? And once you figure that out, okay, what will the end result be? Will it be a good result? Will it be a bad result? Like we said earlier, with criminal justice, everything is magnified through the media. So last but not least, does it pass the media test? Once it get out there to the public, what will the public say? Because of course, we're all judged by the court of public opinion. So we all have different moral compasses, I guess you could say. We all have different values, but you have to say, okay, what will the public think about this? And, do you want to put yourself in jeopardy of losing your job? Do you want to, stain the reputation of the department or the agency? So you kind of have to look at the big picture sometimes. And there's been some cases where you've had law enforcement and attorneys who, they know an individual is guilty, or they know an individual is a big time drug, but they'll do unethical things in order to get that person in custody or to pull that car over. And you're talking root of the poisonous tree, where everything after that unlawful stop is inadmissible in court. So unfortunately, you see sometimes that, law enforcement and the courts and corrections, they do things in order to get people into custody or to put charges on people that they know are guilty. but they go about it and doing it the wrong way. So at the end of the day, I would say, number one, is it legal? Number two, does it align with policy? And most importantly, what will the public say about it? Does it pass the media test? Because we all know in the social media age right now, anything that gets out is going to be looped over and over and over and over. And of course, it has some negative ramifications to it.
I have similar advice. You start looking at the law first. Is there something that applies? Then I would look at institutional policies or procedures and consider the question. And then I would also look at past precedent. What have we done in the past when there hasn't been clear guidance in those gray areas? Looking at what we've done before in order to treat people equitably. And then one piece of advice for professionals, new professionals entering the workforce would be to never surprise your boss. Always keep everyone in the loop. Needs to be in the loop especially when you're making decisions in that gray area.
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record because you start off with that question. First, is something legal? And then is it ethical? And what is the public going to think about this? And also even how it makes you feel about yourself. Sometimes that's that will carry. Sometimes you just know that something is not right. In the accounting profession, you can go to the Georgia Society of CPAs that can, if it's really a problem that really concerns you, and find out what their recommendations are and what's within that code of ethics. And the American Institute of CPAs also has a website, many resources that tell you what is the right thing to do. If you're in a situation, and one thing I tell my students is that when you've got a supervisor that's trying to get you to do something and it is wrong, and this is what happened with the Enron case, is there was finally a whistleblower who came forward. And many people mistakenly think that if my boss tells me to do it, that's not always the case. And you can find yourself in a tremendous amount of trouble. And sometimes you just have got to make the decision, I'm going to work here or not. I would, when you feel like within the company that you're in, that you're being made to do something unethical, reach out and just try to get some feelers on what you should do. It can possibly mean that that's just not the job for you. There is a website that has a tremendous amount of information. It's whistleblowers.org, and I hope that no one ever gets in the situation of feeling like they've got to be a whistleblower, but it is something that is a reality that comes about sometimes in accounting. And that was the cover of Time magazine one year, was the whistleblowers. That was in the Enron Act, but I hope it never comes down to that. From just an employer standpoint, the way they can want to protect them against getting in trouble is to have ethics training for their employees. Under the federal sentencing guidelines, if there have been training that you have done in your company, then that will allow the penalties to be lessened. So those are some important things to look at. But, my main piece of advice, if something does not feel right, just don't do it. You can ruin your future. And as I said before, your resume building is starting now. Your reputation is starting now. And you want to have, your reputation is everything.
One of the things that in recent years that started happening is a buzzword, transparency. And I would tell people that it's not really a buzzword. It means being clear, acting openly, being honest. And so in my field, when someone says, which is a regretful kind of common question, I have a DUI, or I've been arrested before, or I've been written up before, should I put that on the application? And so I tell the truth that transparency, honesty will work. And if it doesn't, it means that opportunity is probably not for you. And because it may come back and you want to operate in a clear conscience. One of the things I thought about, though, is that I'm a part of Rotary. And many people may know what that organization is, Rotary International. And we typically begin our meetings with 4 questions that kind of guide our moral conscience. For the sake of time, I won't go over all 4, but the last 2 that we typically say is, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And is it good for all concerned? And so operating from that premise, I think is pretty good for all of us. Think about in career services, when you think about what is it that you're wanting to say about yourself, what is it, the image that you want to put out there, what do you want to come back to you? Is it going to be beneficial? In addition to that, for not to be too spiritual, but for those that are that guided by those principles, I think about the first 4 deal with your relationship with your higher power. The last 6 deal with your relationship with others. And so your relationship with others be that you want to be honest, and the information that you put out there, you want it to be accurate. And that does start on your resume, and it does it carries forth into the interview setting. And so in career, I just kind of got people to keep those thoughts in mind.
There's nothing I can disagree with what has been said. Be transparent. The world hates surprises, particularly healthcare, but lawyers too, right? I mean, and the other thing is, when you're younger and newer in the field, you don't have to know everything. You are given a break. Don't be afraid to ask others. And even as you get more experienced, go ask others. You're not in this alone. Ethics is not an individual activity. That's morals. Ethics are the group consensus. And people will help you. They really will. It's encouraged. The other thing is, we live in a world where ethics and law and even technology change. And today they change rapidly. So it's up to you to stay up to date, not only on the technology, not only on the changing laws, but we look at changing ethics. There are things we do today in medicine that are required. It's malpractice if you don't do it. 20 years ago, you would have been held criminally that. Okay, so you got to stay up. And finally, as was suggested, the best advice I ever got about ethics in law school was never do something you wouldn't want on page 2 of the New York Post. And if you just simply think about that, and today you don't have that, you have the internet. And so, just think about how it's perceived. But sometimes when your ethics say to do something and you know it's right, or you believe it's right, it may not be right, but it's ethical to you, you do have to separate yourself, and you have to be brave. It may cause you to lose a job, but it's your license. You're the one who's going to have to get up. So sometimes being ethical, you have to be brave.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to thank all of the panelists today for their insights into the subject matter of ethics. That concludes our discussion. I'd like to thank them out to participate in this discussion and to help us in our celebration of Ethics Awareness Week.